Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby. Back in the city today and joined by Chris Hansen. Chris, how are you?
Very good, Toby. How are you?
Very, very good. Thank you. Very, very good. A bit hot. It's back up in the city today, the hottest day of the year. I haven't really done my thinking on all of that, have I? But yeah, it's a hot one.
Well, I had a conversation with a lawyer this morning, and he was happy to be in the office because it was 10% capacity and it was air conditioned. So maybe there's an upside for you being where you are.
We need to work on air conditioning a little bit, but we've got far less than 10% capacity in here as well today. So as you can see from behind me. But listen, Chris, it's great to have you on the show and a wealth of knowledge I know you're going to share with us. Before we do that, let's go into you and Adoptech, a fascinating company, one that I genuinely believe is so relevant from the last 4 or 5 years of conversations I have. I think you guys are addressing one of the principal issues. But I'm not going to tell everyone about that. Let's go from the Oracle itself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background in the company.
Yeah, great, thanks. Well, I mean, I spent 20 odd years in capital markets. I largely ran sales teams, largely at Deutsche Bank. And the last 6 years, I've spent rounding my skill sets. So I've worked directly with fintechs in various roles. I spent 9 months as an executive in residence at Illuminate Financial. I picked up a board seat along the way, so I've learned my craft around governance, etc. And I'm invested in quite a few companies myself, typically non-fintech. And all of that took me full circle to launch Adoptech in January of this year. And really, that's a manifestation of frustrations as to why financial services as a sector doesn't seem to evolve, that fast. And so, in essence, what we are, I mean, if you get to give you the 5-second pitch, it's we are the RAC for cloud-based software services. On the one hand, we protect the software customer from a failure or a lack of willingness to continue to make the service available. And on the other side, we make the vendors more enterprise ready because typically they're struggling to be onboarded by the larger entity, the tier 1, tier 2 banks or exchanges or asset managers. So in essence, the clue's in the name. We do what's on the tin. We help to foster the adoption of technology in financial services.
I think that's a really interesting area. And as I said, look, at the outset, I think it's such an important service you're providing at the moment. One of the core things I've seen is the frustration of people with good ideas failing to get adoption of their business, their company, their software, their service. And a lot of that's been about procurement. And we're starting to see some improvements on that. I think, COVID and the pandemic's been a sort of an accelerator for some of this. But tell us a little bit from what you've seen about what's happening in the marketplace at the moment.
Yes. So, thanks. Clearly, so companies not just financial services, but companies have innovated. They've reconfigured supply chains. They've created ventilators or hand sanitizers, when they may have been, whiskey distillers historically. So people have rapidly innovated. And I think companies have learned lessons around, the historical innovation model. But I still think that innovation requires, innovating. It still takes too long to bring a company to market, as in bring a fintech to your company and integrate them and get them live. I mean, typically between 6 and 24 months. And I think a lot of that, or some of that, is down to the lack of standard protocols, let's say for standard APIs, right through to legacy technology stacks that don't really make themselves easily available for the adoption of microservice providers. So I think I agree with you that innovation has accelerated just simply from a survival perspective recently, and people have had to cope. But a lot of the problems still exist, and there still will be an impediment for the adoption of let's say B2B or B2E, as in B2 enterprise. Service providers. So really, I'm hoping that we can start to try and turn it on its head, rather than going through, understand what the risks are that you are assuming by adopting a service provider and mitigate those risks early rather than, later, so that you can deploy the technology, the service that you require more quickly. Which I think is good for the sector, and it's good for the vendor too. And I think what the COVID crisis has reinforced or reasserted is that things are not efficient or technologically driven as possible. To some extent, take for example asset managers, with equity markets, okay, they've done quite well more recently, but they're still down. So their NAVs are down, therefore their income is down. With more disparate working practices, then they need to bake in more costs for having more people to support their business. And ultimately, I think the solution to drive those costs out, to increase efficiencies, to improve the customer experience for things that don't necessarily have an inherent amount of intellectual property, I think the solution for that comes from these, smaller B2B cloud-based fintech providers.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. There's a real opportunity for institutions to reach out and modernize. And you sort of said this at the start of this, that the frustration with the status quo of the financial services markets there. What do you think's led to that? I mean, is it security? Is it stubbornness? Is it tradition? Or is it, what contributes to that?
Yeah, I think, clearly there are, agendas we can't really legislate for. But I mean, in truth, I remember going to a meeting with a customer, and they, I kind of glibly, chastised them for their information security process and the ridiculous amount of questions that they ask these smaller companies. And they said it's not as simple as that. The fact is that we have the obligations from a regulatory perspective around operational resilience, and this is before the EBA came out with their directive in October last year. It's not as simple as just making it our problem because of our questionnaires. We have the regulatory obligations, and as such, we have the problem 1 year from now if the company goes bust. So if they may seem to appear to be a brilliant idea, and nobody gets into integrating a company or adopting their software thinking it's going to go wrong, but potentially it does. So I think to me it's that reticence that slows down the evolution, along with what we've already touched on, in that I don't think that the architecture is that open and doesn't allow the easy adoption of fintechs. And I think also, I kind of think about it in innovation is three things. You need to validate, you need to integrate, and in our case with Adoptech, you want to insulate. And I think the validation and integration process also requires some work. We've already touched on the stack, but I think people like Access Fintech.
Yeah,
you guys have interviewed Roy Sarden. I think that has the potential to be an open API sandbox where any company can publish a problem and any company can consume a solution. And I think that ultimately would also start to accelerate, the process around proof of concepts, that I think is also, it's quite broken, because, in order even just to do a limited proof of concept, it takes quite some time to get that microservice provider, into your organization.
You're in a very fascinating spot, and I've always thought that the job that you do is one of those sort of fantastic opportunities just to sort of see so many different businesses and have such variety in what you do. But it's also there, isn't it, to pick the right horses to an extent. And when you're advising to new and growth businesses, there's obviously things there that you're looking for and looking at to say what's worth investing that sort of time into, and on occasion with, as you say, with money. What stands out to you? What are you looking for, particularly at this time as well? Because there's going to be winners and losers, right?
No, sure. So, I mean, inherently, the customer picks a service, or they use someone like Illuminate Financial to filter, or they use, and I think you guys have also interviewed Rupert Bull at the Disruption House, they use a benchmarking service. So ultimately, it's not our job to pick the winners and losers. However, it is our job to ensure that we are in a state of readiness to assure any given service. So we would want to understand, a lot of the questions or answers to the questions that they would go through for the bank assessments. So to some extent, we have a deeper insight into that. We want to know how their technology is set up. We want to know about their people. We want to know about their finances, and then we want to make sure that they over time are demonstrating some of the disciplines that we would expect to see from a small company. If we don't see them, it starts to flag that we need to start working with the company to help them evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting, isn't it? And you mentioned there as well about the expectations of the banks and how those banks are able to partner and the challenges that they have. And let's face it, there will be challenges. It isn't an easy thing to onboard a vendor at the moment. Channel partners is a route to do that. What's the best way of a business looking to do that and still maintaining their identity? And
yeah, I think it's a great question. I think about the sales model we often think about is an inverted triangle, where the bottom of the triangle, the point, is one to one, and the top of the triangle is one to infinity, let's say. So in my mind, we all think about the direct sale, banging on a door, using a network to connect with someone to try and make a direct sale to an end user. And we also think about probably the conference circuit, which is one to, let's say, infinity, or social media or LinkedIn. But I think what we tend to forget is the role of the joint venture or partner. Now, that never feels as sexy as getting that direct sale, but what it does generate is virtuous feedback loops. So if you make a sale and someone else makes a sale at the same time through a JV, that's virtuous. And if that person makes a sale and they're part of the pipe work, if you like, they create for you a one-to-many type distribution channel, albeit it might be at a lower price point. In my mind, that you don't have to create the distribution if they already have the distribution. So looking for JVs where someone benefits when you benefit commercially, and partnerships where someone benefits by association with your offering and you benefit by association with them. To me, I don't feel, and that's the sort of middle section of the triangle, I don't feel that is an area that people really experiment enough with, and they try too hard, and it takes so long to get to realize that a direct sale for all the reasons that we've already talked about. So why don't you try and find the people that already have that integration, so you're only integrating to one person to get access to many. That's my sense. In the last few years of working directly with firms. Of course, that's not always available to everyone, but it's certainly something that I think people overlook the opportunity set of.
And it's so important, isn't it? Because we see so many companies sort of strangulated through this process. We see businesses there who've got a great idea, a great product, but simply not the sort of lifespan to last that 12, 24 months that it can take to get through a procurement process. And that sort of partner, are there other routes that people can look at with this as well? I mean, how are businesses surviving through this as people become more procrastinating through this sort of period?
I mean, again, so if I look at how we approach it, we work. Who signs the contract with the company that is being adopted? The law firm. Who are the top 3 law firms in, let's say, an area that we cover is in code escrow? Well, it's DLA Piper, it's Field Fisher, and it's Bird & Bird. Who's the head of the practice? Go and talk to them. Work with them to put a thought piece together. Co-market that. Work with them to think about a legal construct, so that they're ultimately naturally selling what we're selling. So I'm not suggesting that everyone goes to every law firm. What I'm suggesting is you think a little bit more about the adjacencies to your business, and how those parties might be able to help you, generate, brand, momentum, distribution, etc. So clearly, we, as I said, the upside down triangle, we focus a lot on one-on-one sales, and we focus on whatever the conference circuit now looks like, webinars. We don't focus enough on the commercial JVs, in my opinion. So think about the slight tangential adjacencies that are other groups or companies that are inherently in your business, but you haven't necessarily considered them before.
That conference circuit is a very interesting thing, isn't it? Because we've it regularly comes up in these conversations I'm having, and people have used it as a crutch for so long. Trade tech's been massively important. Hence, I guess it's expensive at various different stages. The EMA trading conference has grown from strength to strength over the last sort of 10 years or so since I first went to it. It gets bigger and bigger every single year. You take that out, and it's a massive part of the sales cycle that's been removed for people, right? And it's and I think it's created a gap that webinars are trying to fill. But that face-to-face networking thing, taken out of a sales context, is very difficult to replace, right?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I'm very fortunate that I've had so many years in capital markets, and that's given me a very broad network. And certainly the last 6 years, I've really doubled down on keeping that network alive. And I feel at the moment that no one's going to sign a contract or invest in you, give you money, unless they've personally met you face to face. So it is a challenge. I would challenge you that has the conference circuit ever been that effective as a sales tool? Because frankly, it's all in the follow up. But so clearly, we've more migrated to webinars. But just go back to the point I was making earlier. If and I don't know if it's Access Fintech, but if there are a better route, to market, to attract people, to get buyers and sellers, or providers and consumers together technologically, that would be a far better approach than the conference circuit, because that is one-to-one to many, if you see what I mean. There's many people there, and you're trying to get those one-to-one relationships. But again, I would suggest it's really time to think again about how we approach that, and effective use of time and resources, because you're absolutely right. These are expensive events to go to, but I would hazard the yield rate is pretty low.
And there's some good good connectors in the industry as well, right? There's people there who are getting better and better at sort of seeing opportunity and putting the dots together with people. And as long as companies are there and sort of building the network through that sort of means, there can be a lot that comes out of that as well. And as you say, look, they're marquee. You have to be there, because what if you're not there? It seems to be the predominant part. And I think from everyone I'm speaking to, the bit that's missed the most is actually the business that isn't done on the floor itself, but in the bars surrounding it as well. And that sort of old school mentality is slowly starting to, in my mind, be replaced by really strong positioning, really strong branding, really strong marketing teams that then allow the sales team to conjoin with it. And we've seen a big swing from the traditional barroom salesperson of a capital markets vendor turn into something a little bit more eloquent and advanced, I think, in terms of how sales and marketing work together. I don't know if you've seen the same thing.
Well, I guess I would, when we talk about old school, yes, we think about a pub or a bar, but it's not. It's, we are social animals, and we require that interaction. We require to, looking in the whites of somebody's eyes and having that interaction, all that body language and all the other signals that you pick up. So, I don't think about old school as being, school tie network, but more about, old school is meeting people, and you need that to reinforce that relationship of trust that ultimately allows you to build a relationship so that there's a transaction, to be had, an exchange of dollars. The
fusion of both for me. It's about having that skill to be face to face, and that we're slowly getting back to being able to have that as well, but also having the sort of right sort of product messaging and backup to that to provide real value.
Also, I mean, maybe this is a slight tangential comment, but I think there's a lot of, and I don't hesitate to say this because I also have grey hair, but there's a lot of people purporting to be technologists working for a technology firm, but they're not really as technologically proficient as you would hope that they would be. I remember doing a survey of a number of companies within financial services, particularly with a view to considering what the sales outlook and process might be for one of the firms. There were some, I guess, thoughts that the sales strategy wasn't proficient or accurate enough. But actually, once you got into the detail, you could see that they had a 10-to-1 inbound to outbound inquiry. So they were generating really very positive leads from their process. And actually, as I looked through other companies that were in our universe, you could see that many of them hadn't got their public or internet persona accurate enough, and they weren't attracting the right kind of leads. And I guess what I learned from that process was simply that actually all that information and data will tell you where you need to put your next salesperson and which center you need to open up, because you should be mining and optimizing as much of your web persona as you can in order to start to generate that inbound interest. I mean, people don't even, if you think about your keywords and key phrases that someone would search for on Google, people don't even easily think about how they optimize for that, if you understand.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. It's there are businesses there who get it, and I think are really thriving at the moment, and businesses who don't, and are possibly falling a little bit behind, or certainly sitting in a complacent mode because of their positioning and their history behind it. And I think that's that would be a concern for me about businesses who are complacent at these times, because there's going to be a lot of people who are providing really good services to come and eat the lunch.
That's fine with me. Let them be complacent.
There to help.
There are so many, as I said, if you think about efficiency gains, driving the costs out, improving customer experience. I think I see the world now as, if you've got some form of, if you've got a data set and you've got intellectual property within that, you probably want to keep that in-house, but everything else is fair game.
Yeah.
So if you want to push the costs out, if you want to, increase efficiency, reduce headcount, if you want something that augments, the onboarding process of a customer, through authentication, etc., there are a myriad of technology providers out there, and their opportunity set is much greater now than it was. So yeah, please bring on the complacency, because I think that's great news for the many thousands of B2B cloud providers that are out there. I think it's a great opportunity set, but as we said already, they have to think about how they want to approach the market, and we need to start to see an evolving landscape for those first two stages of innovation, being validation and integration. Yeah,
I absolutely agree. I want to move into the sort of theme of what these interviews have been so far, which is looking at the positives from the negative we find ourselves in. And without question, as this has evolved, it's becoming increasingly clear to me that there is a plethora of opportunities through all of this. And if never waste a good recession, as the old saying goes, I think we're in a position here to emerge far stronger as a sector, financial services sector. Particularly through technology. Taking your crystal ball out, what do you see as some of the things that you anticipate as being the positives from this? Where do you see the opportunities, and how are we going to be better from all of this?
It's a good question, because clearly there's lots of things to think about. I think it was the Startup Genome did a survey in April that said that 40% of startups, I think they surveyed around about 2,000 companies. 40% of startups, I think they had around about 3 months of cash, and 30% were already in a red zone. So the first issue is clearly people need to find their way through this, because they're typically, obviously they're moving from funding cycle to funding cycle, and if you're caught without a chair when the music stops, that's a problem. So I think the first thing is to ensure that the companies survive. And obviously you've seen that. I think first, if you talk to accelerators and incubators, VC firms, the first thing they did was to make sure that their portfolio companies were in an okay place. I think there's still a tremendous appetite for people to invest in thoughtful and interesting offerings that start to bring efficiency, cost reduction, and augmented customer experience. So I think, and I think also that the migration to cloud for many financial service or large financial service providers again is creating an opportunity set to start to bring and integrate more providers. And as I said, I think the dawning is there that I think you saw. Yesteryear, you had an innovation department, and we're innovating here. We've got a bit of blockchain and a bit of crypto, and we're innovating. And I think business started to feel, well, okay, well that's great that you're innovating, but you're kind of innovating in a vacuum, and I really need you to innovate, for my business. So they've kind of taken control, and they can identify the problems and the potential solutions. And I think as well, whilst also migrating to cloud means that there's a confluence of a number of relative positives that I think starts to mean that this crisis has made people realize that there's a better way to innovate, and you kind of need to innovate to survive, but you should carry on, with that same momentum and, rapid innovation without necessarily, infuse that throughout the entire firm. And I think that sea change, I think it's starting to happen. So I think there is a real sense of change coming. But the caveat being that certainly what we want to see and what we want to promote is that you start to think about mitigating the risk of deploying the new technologies at the beginning. And I think people get their heads around that. Then you can look for a fantastic opportunity set for both for the consumers of the service and the providers.
And Chris, you and Adoptech are naturally very well placed to help companies exploit that. This is aimed to this whole series has been aimed to help people through this and to come out the other side really flourishing. I think you can be a great help and crutch to people on that journey. If people are watching at the moment and they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that? Go
to our website. We refresh it. That's our single source of truth. So please have a look around that. Otherwise, it's chris.hansen@adoptech.co.uk, and I'm sure we can send some details out after this call.
Top man. Well, listen, that is it's been a fascinating conversation, one which I can continue for a long time. And I'm sure there's going to be follow-ups that we're going to need to film to get this message across, because it is, as I said to you when we spoke last week, to me it's been one of the most common questions and common frustrations of businesses for many years. And I think having people there and a company to help navigate through that is going to be so valuable. And look, I wish you the very, very best of luck, and thank you for being so generous in sharing your time and insight with us today. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for inviting me, and best of luck for the rest of the year for you guys.
Thank you very much indeed. Listen, thanks to you. Thanks for all for watching, and we'll see you soon on another episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.